So thank you, everybody, and welcome to our online audience, which you can see on that screen, and also to our in-room audience. My name is Zaneta Sedilekova, and I'll be presenter for the session. Just by way of background, I run my own consultancy business called Climate Vola, where I advise clients on climate and biodiversity risk, and I'm also a practicing lawyer. But the most important capacity I'm here today in is as a founding member of Legal Voices for the Future. Now, you know that at Legal Voices we like stories. If you have been to our sessions before, you know that we like to talk stories. And I also have a story beyond law, because I'm a human being, first and foremost. So I was born in Slovakia, years after the fall of socialism. I'm a sister to a little brother and an older sister, and I'm an auntie to two little girls. I grew up a dancer, and I retired from dancing when I was 16, and then I dedicated myself to studying. I loved history, I loved art and poetry, I sucked at economics, and currently I no longer dance, but I do a lot of yoga and meditation. And I'm telling you all this because I want to encourage you really to see yourself as more than lawyers, because this is so much more than law. And you will see that that is also how we are going to introduce our interviewee as a human being, first and foremost. And you will also see that that's how we tell the stories of law. So as we are in a new venue, I have to give you some kind of housekeeping rules. The first thing I have to tell you is that this session is being recorded, and I had to put the very official sentence on the slide that all of you can read. The second thing I need to tell you, which I always feel like in a matrix when I say this, but in-room audience, the online audience can actually hear your conversations. And this is it sounds really crazy, but the reason is because we have microphones in the ceiling. That's why I'm not holding a microphone. Apparently, if I project my voice, you can all hear me. So that also means that if you talk, you are going to spoil the experience of the people online, so just be cautious of it. And the third thing I wanted to say is you might see people around the room on their phones. Now, these people are members of Legal Voices, our stewardship committee members, our facilitators. We also have a photographer, Jordi, there. And I want to reassure you that by being on phones, they're not disrespecting me or this session. They're on multiple WhatsApp chats, making sure that the tech is running, counting the number of people in the room and online so that we can allocate facilitators. There is a ton of things going on in the background. And I want to communicate that there are around 30 people behind each session that we organize, so quite a lot of people. And these people are not going to be really fully present at this session today because they're going to be on those chats. So they gifted their time and their energy to you so that all of you could be present here today. And I really want to encourage you to take that gift with gratitude and stay here with us throughout the session so that we honor the time and energy they have put into this session. Now, finally, so Jordi there in the corner is taking photos for us. We use them in our social media, we use them in PowerPoints and stuff like that. If you would not, or if you don't want us to use your image, just approach Jordi. She will take your name down and she will take a picture of your face so that we can find you on photos and make sure we don't use them. So I think that's all my housekeeping, and we can move to the session. So you know that Legal Voices session, or some of you might know that our sessions run in 3 parts. The first one is a substantive presentation where we spend some time on law and sometimes just outside of law. Then we have an interview with a guest speaker. And then at the end, we have a creative content discussion. Now, this session is called Greenwashing and Sustainability Claims. And we chose the name because we knew that our target audience were lawyers, and lawyers like very strict, explicit language, right? And I was like, okay, let's do what we need to. But if I were to be a bit more creative and had more guts in naming this session, I would call it a story of greenwashing. Because that's what I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you legal structure of greenwashing. I'm going to take you through story. I'll talk about history. I'll talk about economics. I'll talk about psychology. And I will talk about law as well, but not too much. And that would be the substantive presentation. In most of the substantive presentation, I'll focus on what I call advertising liability. When we move to the interview, we will have Simon Turnbull, who is a director in Bank of America's Equity Capital Markets legal team, and we will talk with him a bit more about the second leg of greenwashing liability, which is director's liability. And in our creative content discussion, we will discuss a spoken poem, which some of you may have watched before you came here today. It's a spoken poem by Canadian artist Shane Coyson, which is called Shoulders, and we will engage in how we feel about this poem. Now, we have seen previously that our participants, our members, and our guests drop out of our sessions after the first two parts and don't stay for the creative content discussion. And I completely understand, they're long, right? Like they usually run for 2 hours. I get it. But I would really encourage you to stick around for this part, because what we have, the feedback we've received from those who actually stayed was that it was the best part of the session. It's the part where you can bring everything together, your personality as a lawyer, your private life, your emotions, you can really bring it all together. And I know that sometimes the bar to staying is the fact that you haven't engaged with the creative content. And the good news is that this time the creative content is 7 minutes, and we will actually play it today before we engage in the discussion. So no bars to entry. So the only thing we need is your time. So do please stay if you can. We will also have the creative content discussion online. So with that said, let me start with the presentation itself. So as lawyers, we start with definitions, right? We love definitions. And with greenwashing, the good news is that there's no legal definition whatsoever. We do have some suggested definitions from the report you see on the screen, which was concerned with climate washing. And the two definitions that the report presents are the first one, substantiated or misleading claims regarding actors' environmental performance, or the selective disclosure of positive environmental or social impacts while neglecting to disclose or omitting to disclose the negative impacts. Now, these two definitions are, again, not legal, but they do cover the two branches of greenwashing liability that I'll talk to you about today. My definition, very simple definition of greenwashing, is when in the environmental sphere, your private and public life or persona do not align with one another. And I think that's the simplest we can go. I also want to point out that greenwashing goes beyond climate. Companies and people can greenwash with biodiversity, with about biodiversity, about plastics, about climate change as well. But for the purposes today, we are concerned only with climate change, and that is just to reduce the focus of the session, given how little time we have. So let me talk a bit about greenwashing. As I said, in my understanding, there are two legs of greenwashing liability. One of them is advertising liability, and the second one is director's liability. So advertising liability arises from any, or can arise from any marketing. So whether it's broadcast or TV or social media ads, anywhere, there could be potentially greenwashing. Now, the way that advertising liability is enforced, we have two agencies in the UK. We have Advertising Standards Authority, which usually focuses on enforcing individual corporate breaches, so essentially acts that are challenged on the greenwashing grounds, and then Advertising Standards Authority assists. The second authority that deals with greenwashing is Competition and Markets Authority. Now, Competition and Markets Authority is a bit different. What they focus on is a market-wide practice. So instead of an individual corporation, they would take a market. So currently, for example, CMA is investigating fast fashion industry as an industry that could potentially be greenwashing. In terms of legal and regulatory instruments that are listed on the slides, Unfair Commercial Practices Directive is the EU legislation that was implemented into English law by Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. And then we also have regulatory codes, so Green Claims Code, which is used by CMA. And we also have CAP Code and BCAP Code, which are used by Advertising Standard Authority. Again, those of you who are lawyers, like, you know how to learn law, so you don't need me to explain this to you. Well, I can just tell you as a brief background, these codes and legislation gives us definitions. So things like what is an environmental claim, and what is not defined in them is actually not legally defined. So you might be interested to know that the words like green or sustainable don't have legal definitions under English law. Now, director's liability is a bit different. It's still greenwashing liability, but it arises in different circumstances. So some companies in the UK have an obligation to disclose their climate risks. And directors of these companies sign off on the disclosures. And by signing off on these disclosures, they essentially express their endorsement of their content, which means that the disclosure is complete, accurate, and truthful. Now, their liability can arise if this is not the case. So the enforcement of these liabilities can come from financial conduct authority or shareholders themselves. Legal instruments, legal and regulatory instruments we have would be Common Law of Misrepresentation, Companies Act 2006, Financial Services and Markets Act, and FCA listing rules. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them because you guys are smart enough to study them on your own. The few bits I want to point out are the director's duties, so Companies Act 2006, because that's the most common ground that we can see materializing in practice. So the two duties that are really relevant in here come from sections 172 and 174. Section 172 imposes a duty on directors to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its shareholders and stakeholders. And in Companies Act, one of these stakeholders is the environment. So this is where the liability can actually arise. Section 174 lays down a duty to act with due skill, care, and diligence. And when you think about it, when the director signs off on an incomplete disclosure, they're probably not exercising their due care, skill, and diligence correctly. And that's where the liability can arise. These duties could be enforced by shareholders, which is quite powerful. And they create what in law we call personal liability. So directors can be sued not in their capacity as a director, but in their personal capacity. So if they are found to be in breach of their duties, in simple terms, their houses could be seized. And when you think about it, that's a huge motivation for behavioral change, because you are not only potentially endangering the company, you are also endangering your personal assets by mismanaging company's affairs or ignoring mismanaging climate risks. So this is all I want to talk about in terms of law. And for most of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the advertising lack of this liability. And the reason is because when I was thinking about how to structure this presentation, I talked to some of you as well, some of our members, I talked to some of our stewardship committee members, and I was getting opinions about the work. We thought that all of us are consumers, right? We experience the advertising liability as consumers, as lawyers, in so many capacities, whereas probably fewer of us would have spoken to a board of directors. So we kind of thought that this will bring the topic closer to all of you. And then with Simon in the interview, we will talk a bit more about the director's liability. Now, moving on, I want to talk a bit more about greenwashing and economics. So why do we even experience greenwashing, and why has it really risen so much in the recent years? In the past 5 years, greenwashing has skyrocketed. And the question is why? And the simple answer is because it moves money in the economy. So when we talk about advertising liability, who are the targets? Consumers. And what is the aim? To move consumer money. With directors and disclosures, the aims are investors. The targets are investors, and the aim is to move investors' money. Now, what we have seen in the recent years with millennials and also Gen Z, which you can see in the slide, is a shift in consumer preferences. So consumers are more conscious about sustainability of the products they buy, and it's not on the slide, but investors do follow the suit. So this has shifted in the past 5 years, but many companies have not caught up. And that's where the greenwashing comes in, right? Because you want to move that money in your direction as a company, but unfortunately, you don't really align with the values that are currently out there. So you inadvertently engage in some sort of greenwashing, and we will go through the practices of greenwashing, and you will see that some of them are, I don't want to kind of like exonerate anybody, but also I don't want to accuse anybody. Some of them are really innocent or almost ignorant. Like some of them are malicious, we will go through them in the past, but some of them are truly just ignorant of the reality. So it's not all kind of trying to rip us off. It's more about the money is moved in the direction which we as consumers would probably not want our money to go if we had known the whole truth. The economic impacts are huge. And again, we will share the slides and the reports with you so that you can have a look as well. But this is the economic background against which greenwashing takes place. Moving on, I like to talk about history. Remember, I was quite good at history. Economics was really bad, so that wasn't a good slide, but this one is much better. So I want to take you to 1970s. The art is not climate art, but I told you greenwashing, biodiversity, plastics, it goes everywhere. And I'm going to ask Mingzi to play the video for us, and then I'll give you a few more details. refreshing thing. When I told you about all those groups with tech and counting facilitators. Yeah, if it's faster, we can do it that way as well. Whereas I'll tell you what the ad is about, but it will be next to it.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Write for Pollution Booklet, Box 1771, Radio City Station, New York.
Thank you. So this is called Crying Indian.
Ice skating is my passion. Whether I...
Oh, that was funny. So it's called the Crying Indian ad. It's from 1970s. It was an anti-litter campaign in the US, which was called Keep America Beautiful. Now, when you look at it, okay, quality is terrible, we all know it, but let's cut them some slack. It was 1970s. There is a lot culturally, politically, and historically wrong with this ad, and I'm not going to address these things, not because they're not important, but because we are focusing on the environmental aspect. But I will share with you an article from the University of Chicago Press so that you can educate yourself a bit more about all these other aspects. So let me tell you what this ad did. So 1970s US, Oregon introduced the first bottle deposit legislation. 1970s. This ad aired in 1971. What it does is essentially it engages in two greenwashing methods. One of them is deflection and the other one is division. It deflects from corporate responsibility for the litter, and it tells us individuals, people cause solutions. People can address it or whatever it says, right? It's us. It's not corporations, it's us. So this is called deflection because you deflect from the corporate responsibility to the personal responsibility. The impact of deflection is that it puts the burden of, it appropriates the blame on consumers. And because we each make personal lifestyle choices as consumers, we start blaming each other for making different choices, right? So it divides the consumers against each other. We'll talk about this method a bit more later. But what this ad, it aired first time in 1971 on Earth Day, which will be this Sunday. And it was the second Earth Day in the history of humankind. And essentially it created this false sense of personal blame, right? It's you people who cause the pollution, not us. The results were that to date, US has no federal bottle deposit legislation, not at all. Out of all US states, only 11 have some form of bottle deposit legislation. And you know what that legislation would do? It would say, when I take a disposable bottle from a store, I'll return it to the store and it will go to the corporation that created it or to some facility and it will be recycled there. Without that legislation, the bottle stays with you as a consumer. It's your fault, right? That's what they're saying. So essentially, it aired after Oregon went on to introduce this legislation, and ever since it had this huge impact on the US. And I just want you to kind of stop and think about this. And if you really need to think about it, close your eyes and meditate. You're welcome to do it. I'm not going to force you, but you are. But think about how it makes you feel. That ad, like on the first look, it was okay, right? Like maybe when you think a bit more, it was a bit cultural appropriation or other issues. But the impact of an ad in the 1970s is that today, US has no federal bottle deposit legislation. That was the marketing campaign. And just to say, I have found that Keep America Beautiful was composed of leading beverage and packaging corporations. So the whole campaign was run by these corporations. So greenwashing dates far beyond this ad, but I think this ad is a very good introduction to the history of greenwashing. And oh, I could have done this. Look at that. You learn every day. So I want to take you to the area of climate change. So these are some examples from a Guardian article, again, something I will share with you. And the one in the middle, Lies They Tell Our Children, was disguised as an editorial. So it was a review of a book. And it was published in 1984. And it was a review of a book, Why Are We Lying to Our Children? And essentially, the editorial, when you read it, undermined climate science in 1984, saying that it was inaccurate, it was unclear, and it encouraged parents to talk to their children about benefits of economic growth, such as increased life expectancy, more leisure, and better materials, such as plastics. So that was the book review. Now, the Little Chicken one, who told you the earth is warming, Little Chicken, it was published in 1991. And it was published by, or created by, Informed Citizens for the Environment, which was a group of coal and utility companies. And the ad was aimed at undermining climate science, calling it weak, non-existent, inaccurate, and the physics of climate science open to debate. We are in 1991. Some of us were born, some of us were born later, maybe before, but we are within our lifetimes, most of us. Now, the last one, BP one, reduce your carbon footprint, but first find out what this is. This is ad that first ran in 2004, so we are much closer to the current days. And it was introduced by BP, and it was introduced to all of us as consumers to find our own personal carbon footprint, right? There is like personal or deflection from corporate responsibility to personal responsibility, deja vu here. BP also ran this campaign under a different name in 2019, so 4 years ago. It was called Know Your Carbon Footprint, and it was run on social media. So I just want you to understand that this is happening since 1970s until now, and there are so many nuances that I'll still address with you. Before I do, let's look at greenwashing today. If you are overwhelmed by this slide, that was exactly the intention, because greenwashing today is overwhelming. We see it everywhere. So all of these ads have been held to be greenwashing by Advertising Standards Authority. So these are not my opinions. This is legal authority telling you this is greenwashing. So let me take you through some of them. Airlines struggle. So it's Lufthansa with the airplane and the globe, and then Etihad, which was, I think, the ad was found to be greenwashing only a week ago, I think. I think Sophie posted on it on LinkedIn, and that's how I learned. So thank you, Sophie. And essentially, what both ads have in common is when airlines struggle with this, because aviation is a hard to decarbonize industry. So they set net zero goal by 2050 or 2030, whatever it is. And then they put out these ads saying connecting the world, protecting its future. You know, we are building the green planet, contributing. The issue is that what they rely on to substantiate that claim, because we know that the claims have to be substantiated by evidence, are future technologies that either do not exist yet or are not scalable. So essentially, they have a good intention, but they don't know how to get there, and they market it. And under English law, that's greenwashing. Now, HSBC, climate change doesn't do borders. HSBC published this ad on bus stops throughout London. You could have seen it. There was a second version of it. But essentially, what HSBC said is climate change doesn't do borders, neither do rising sea levels. That's why HSBC is aiming to provide up to $1 trillion or pounds in financing and investment globally to help our clients transition to net zero. Now, this was greenwashing because it was selective. Yes, HSBC said that they're going to provide this much money to their clients to help them transition to net zero, but at the same time, they have financed projects that in the 1 year alone emitted 65.3 million tons of carbon dioxide, and that was just oil and gas projects. That didn't include transport and other projects. And they didn't include it in the app. So that was very selective, right? Because you as a consumer look at it and you're like, oh, they're green, they're doing the right thing. But partially, let's get them something. Yeah, they are, but they're also doing something else, and they didn't tell us. So this was held to be greenwashing because of the selective advertising. And the last two ads, which is Oatly and Alpro, I wanted to put them up there because these companies, if you are into sustainable food, you would say they are trying to do the right thing. And again, I'm with you, they are. The issue why the two ads were held to be greenwashing, and the top one was actually on the buses. You see how long it is? It was on the buses in London. So the issue with alternative food products, so oat milk, any vegan patties and everything, is that what the advertisers do, they say we have lower carbon footprint than milk, right? The traditional milk, which sounds okay to all of us. The issue with that is that they never substantiated with life cycle analysis. So what they fail to do is to calculate that, okay, almond milk, but how much carbon is in growing the almonds? How much carbon is involved in transporting the almonds from California or Canary Islands to the UK? And then how much carbon is actually involved in making the milk? So this is called a life cycle analysis. And they, in both examples, there are more grounds for greenwashing. I'm just giving you the kind of the most common one. So in both examples, they fail to substantiate their claims that their milk is less carbon intensive or better for the planet than cow milk by whole cycle analysis. They just didn't carry out that analysis. So that's why it was greenwashing as well. So it's quite an elaborate advice that you have to give to your clients if you are advising them on advertising. My almost final slide is about psychology of greenwashing. And most of these methods come from a book called New Climate War by Michael Mann. No need to read it because I have 2 pages of notes from the book with these methods that I'm very happy to share with you. And some of them, and you will recognize them through the history I have just given you. So denying essentially climate change doesn't exist, right? 1970s. No longer possible to say today because we have IPCC reports. Downplaying tells you climate change is real, but its impacts are overstated, right? It doesn't have the real impact. Again, not really a method these days anymore because California wildfires, and then we have Australia under fire, and then we have 2 days of 40 degrees in the UK, right? Like, we see the impact. You can't tell us there are none. Now, deflecting the crying Indian ad or your personal carbon footprint really deflects. Another deflecting that Michael Mann mentions is over-reliance on innovation. So essentially saying we don't need to decarbonize because we can innovate our way out of climate change. And that's dangerous because innovation has a part, but it cannot be a replacement for decarbonization. It has to be supplementary to it. So that's actually greenwashing as well. Delaying a method which says climate change is real, but it's not as bad as it seems. There's no need to take action now. Let's live our lives, business as usual. We can delay it to the second half of the 21st century. Again, very dangerous if you know what IPCC has written. Now, the methods I want to spend a bit more time on are on this side of the slide, dividing, doomsaying, and overstating ambitions. Dividing, one of my colleagues once called it divide and conquer. And I actually love that because it really tells you what it does. So, you know, if we focus on our personal responsibilities and somebody becomes vegan and somebody gives up flying, then we start like, why aren't you vegan? And why are you still flying? And then we just argue about something which is irrelevant because as an individual, we all can together make an impact. But as an individual, that's a personal lifestyle choice. And it will be impacted by your personal circumstances. So if somebody has family abroad, it's much harder for them to give up flying than somebody whose family is in the UK. And some people struggle being vegans because of how their bodies function. So we need to respect those choices. And you know, dividing campaigns are actually there to divide us against each other. And if we are divided, we just cannot speak uniform voice. One point, very personal, I want to make here is that dividing is being used to divide professions as well. And you can see it in our professions too, our legal profession. So there are kind of uncomfortable feeling sometimes in legal profession where lawyers who pursue climate litigation stop talking to lawyers who advise corporates on their emissions on how to decarbonize. And that creates friction, right? That creates the division. And then we argue against each other and we blame each other for what we do. And it's tricky because if you are a corporate lawyer advising your client, the advice is private and confidential. You can't talk about it. But there is also a point of trust. Like, if you care about this is the only home we have, so I would hope everybody does. You can't, in your good conscience, suspect that a person who is advising somebody would lack integrity to a point of not doing the right thing, not advising them to decarbonize. And this really worries me when I see these frictions created in our professions, where lawyers just stop talking to one another and being suspicious of what they do. And I always feel like, as a community, we are all driven to the same purpose, right? To save the only home we have. And then if we stop talking and start blaming each other for what we do, it's really hard to speak with a uniform voice. So I sometimes really like to think about greenwashing as like, it's not only consumer, it's also our profession, which is facing the same kind of tactic to divide us. So I just wanted to make a personal appeal in here. Doomsaying, that's scary. It's not really present yet, but we kind of expect doomsaying in 2030s maybe. So doomsaying actually says it's too late to act, we are doomed, so let's party until the end. Business as usual, let's enjoy the life. Now, I'm going to talk to you a bit about your brain, how your brain responds to these things. So normally, when you are relaxed, your nervous system is in relaxed mode. It's called parasympathetic mode. You can make rational choices. You are very calm. You can connect your emotions, and you can distinguish your brain from your emotions, and you can engage your rational and emotional intelligence to make a decision. Now, when you are faced with a threat, you go into sympathetic mode, which in common tongue is called flight, fight, freeze response. And this response we inherited from our ancestors, hunters and gatherers, right? They needed it because when they were approached by a lion or an elephant or something that could have killed them, they needed to very quickly assess whether they can fight the danger because the danger is small, whether they will run away from it because the danger is too big. The freeze response comes when you cannot run away and you cannot fight. The danger is too big to fight and too big to run away from. You freeze, right? You freeze. What do you think climate change is? Can you as an individual fight climate change? You can't. Can you run away from it? We don't have a planet B. This is the only home we have. So most people, when you talk to them about climate change, the first response is freeze. And freeze means that your nervous system literally kind of withdraws from your body and you cannot do anything. You're just frozen. And you hear all those talks about climate inaction. What do you think it is? It's fear. It's a response to the threat that we cannot fight as individuals and we cannot run away from. People freeze because they're ready to die. That's the actual biological response that we had from our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So if doomsaying is put on top of it, we will have a frozen society and nothing gets done. I want to also emphasize how you can unlock this freeze response, because it's a very natural response and we should be cognizant of it when we talk to our friends, our family, our clients. They'll all freeze. That's natural. Like, not to blame them of it. Like, it's very natural. But we we deliver that message, so we have a power to shape the delivery. And the way you can unfreeze them, first thing you can do is to create a community, because yes, one person cannot address climate change, but together we have a better chance, right? That's what we are doing with Legal Voices. As a community, you feel empowered. Second thing you can do is you can talk about past success stories. So remember ozone layer? Like, most of us weren't even born then, but ozone layer was a big thing. And in 1987, Montreal Protocol, which was an international treaty that countries agreed to, started reducing the pollution that caused ozone layer. And there is a 2017 progress report which actually said that there was a remarkable decrease in ozone hole over Antarctica. So we have done it once, right? There was like a huge environmental problem we couldn't fight as individuals, we couldn't escape from, and we have addressed it. So telling success stories can be very powerful because you unlock that freeze response. And when the fear is unlocked, people can act, right? Because they go to their parasympathetic response. They are calm and rational and they can take action. And the last thing you can do, and I used to be so conflicted about this when I was asked to speak about climate change 5 years ago, and somebody told me, like, speak about business opportunities. And I was so outraged. I was like, business opportunities in climate change? Like, are you kidding? There should be no business opportunities in climate change. This is ridiculous. But then it kind of like clicked to me, and I thought, like, of course they are, because the world is going to continue. And the message that you are delivering to your audience when you talk about business opportunities is unlocking that fear, right? So you need to be very cognizant that the way you talk will impact the response you get. And you are fully responsible for how you talk. Doomsday. Now, the last one, overstating ambition. So my pedantic brain was really against putting this one on the slide because there was a beautiful alliteration going there with all the D's. And all of a sudden I ended up with overstating ambitions. I was like, how do I say overstating starting with D? And I just couldn't figure it out. And it was 11 p.m. and I was like, you go to bed, girl. So I did. So we have one thing that still bothers me there, but unfortunately it's that. This is one that my comment doesn't mention in his book, but it's the most common one today. And I already mentioned it. So, corporations set net zero target by 2050, 2030. They're really passionate about it. They really believe, but they have no idea how to reach it. But they want to sell it to the world. And unfortunately, that's greenwashing as well. And if you are in a room where your client is proposing something like this, again, be very cognizant how you talk, because these people often want to do the right thing and they're passionate about it. And you need to, or I like to acknowledge that passion and really the fact that they have moved in that direction, because it's not easy when you have a big corporation to actually get everybody agree on a target. So I like to be very compassionate about addressing it, saying, well done, like it's great, but it's not enough. And I think that's also very important to navigate your language in those circumstances. So that's all when it comes to our greenwashing, story of greenwashing. And again, we will share the slides and I will share my notes from this book. So nobody needs to buy it. Nobody needs to read it. You will have my notes if you trust them. And we will move on to our interview with Simon. Mingzi, if we could get Simon on the screen. He's in the corner there. Hi, Simon.
Hello.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
That's right. We are just trying to put you on the whole screen.
Try to use the main. Everyone.
Just give us a few seconds. Have you been with us from the beginning?
I have, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll appreciate the feedback afterwards.
That's great. Enjoying it.
You can't be really honest on right here. I am because of embarrassing, but thank you. So Simon, as I said, Simon Turnbull is a director of Bank of America Equity Capital Markets Legal Team. It's a long title, Simon. And we are really appreciative of the time you're giving us tonight because I know it's late. And yeah, welcome.
Thank
want
you.
To start. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with a first question, Simon. Could you tell us your story? Who are you as a human being, first and foremost?
That is quite a question. So, yeah, I mean, following your example at the start, Zaneta, I could put it into a few tags. And, I'm a son, a husband, a father of two highly annoying little children. I love dearly, a brother, pet owner. One of the kids has got a crested gecko. A photographer, a lawyer, and a terrible golfer, in no particular order. But I grew up in the Lake District, so as a bit of a background where I got my sort of passion for the environment. You can see some of the pictures. These are the kind of places that I love dearly. So in terms of my story as a human being, it kind of originates from the Lake District, if anyone's been there. And then is sort of gone through various stages to where I am today. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we wanted, just to know you as the most important thing you are, the most important being you are. I just want to point out that on this slide, which introduces Simon, you can see his own photos of natural landscape. So he's a really good photographer, basically. I struggle choosing 3 specific ones because I think you sent me like 6 and I was like, this is so hard. So we have more, but they're beautiful. Thank you, Simon. So moving on to you as a lawyer, you know that for Legal Voices, most people in the audience are lawyers, non-lawyers, trying to find purpose for, or trying to find their place and purpose of saving the planet, essentially. So could you tell us how you get to this purpose yourself as a lawyer in your career?
Yes, I mean, the story starts as a sort of 16-year-old Simon, I suppose, when in my day, which was a little bit before most of yours, our career advice involved plugging in data points into a very old computer, and it would splurge out what your career should be. And every time I put it in, it said I should be a forest warden. And so I ignored all that advice and did a law degree instead. But hopefully I'm kind of coming back to the forest warden side at some point. And so yes, I did a law degree, and then I went to York College of Law, and then I got a training contract at Lovells, as it was then, and became, after training, became a corporate lawyer. And did that for 4 or 5 years until I got a job at then Merrill Lynch, which very soon after, with the financial crisis in 2008, which was not my fault. It was, I have to add, was sort of taken over by Bank of America, and so that's kind of my general legal route. But then in 2020. I was very fortunate enough, a lady that worked in the pro bono committee came and gave a talk to us about the pro bono opportunities within the bank. And that really was a start for me for my work on the environmental side. As I said, I love the environment, and I've been doing things at home, with the family and trying to do, my bit to do that, but I'd never really put the sort of the law and my corporate work at Bank of America, with the ability to actually to make change as well, which which was crazy, but it just the opportunities hadn't arisen. And then so with the pro bono work, I started working with the Chancery Lane project, which some of you may know, and that's where I met you, Zaneta, and really just started working with really energized people of all different ages, and realized that just because I was a corporate lawyer, I had a lot to give as an environmental someone who cares about the environment. I think as lawyers, I mean, we're really just dealing with words on a page. It's not actually rocket science when you boil it down to just dealing with words. And we have so much to give, even if you're not a specialist environmental lawyer, for example, as I'm not. And so with the Chancery Lane project, we helped with definitions and drafting clauses, and that was great. And then through more pro bono work, I did more environmental work and wildlife trafficking research and things like that. And then through that work, the bank sort of picked up that I was doing all this, and decided that when they were going to start doing more work internally to for example, put in a greenwashing code of conduct or working on their ESG DDQ, then I was the person to help out with that. So I've kind of, by good fortune in some ways, been able to start doing more environmental work within my day-to-day job, which I still do my corporate day job, which is equity capital markets, and that touches on greenwashing a little bit. But I do more now as well. So it's been a bit of a journey, but really, the last 2 or 3 years since I've been doing environmental work has really energized me, and just working with lots of different people doing cool stuff has been amazing.
Thank you very much, Simon. You have frozen for us.
Oh, have I?
Oh, you're good now. Thank you. I just didn't want you to be frozen while you answer another question. So my next question concerns your day-to-day work. So where do environmental concerns come into your day-to-day work, and what are they about? Climate, biodiversity, water, plastic, what do you deal with?
Yeah, so my day-to-day job is the equity capital markets, and as you said in your talk, It's about bringing investors to corporates to help raise money. That is a big part of it. And then also, as you said, there's the opportunities which you didn't want to face a few years ago. But when you work within a bank, there are opportunities there. Being the first mover, not having a stranded asset, for example, and also investors have their own environmental committees, and so they're more likely to invest in what they see as a green product. And with that comes risk of overstatement, whether that's through overambition or through misleading statements. And so we see, as the corporates we work with put out their disclosures to investors, there is pressure on them to disclose their green credentials. And so they have to come up with something. Hopefully it's true and accurate and not misleading, but there are times when that can stray, and that's where you saw some of your cases. And so we have to be very mindful of it. And I think as legislation catches up, and certainly with the bad press or good press, depending on which way you look at it, of these actors that have misled consumers, I think that will only bring it more to the forefront and focus everyone's minds.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating in the sense that you can already see not only in your pro bono practice, but also in your capital markets practice, which I suspect is a shift over the past 5 years as well. Now, I want to bring you to the director's liability. So as you know, I haven't covered it extensively in my presentation by choice, because our audience, I believe, could relate more to the consumer advertising liability from a position of a consumer. However, I would like to ask you about your opinion. How do you think personal liability impacts the board of directors in real life?
Well, it's a difficult one because I think there's two sides to it. I think and it'll be interesting how the current Client Earth Shell case goes to see what impact that has. I think clearly where they do have responsibility under the Act, then and there is a personal liability, then that will hopefully focus minds. Well, I think the flip side is that what you don't want is for people to not want to do the role, the fear of personal liability. You want the right people that are fully understanding of the risks and the implications, taking on those roles, and not being fearful to do them. I think the other slight issue is, or considerable issue, is that the area, particularly with climate change, is very complex. And so if their company is putting out disclosures on their net zero ambitions, then it may well be that the directors themselves have had third-party experts, for example, giving them that advice. And they will ultimately then sign off on the statement. But is it their responsibility to understand the minutiae of that kind of climate disclosure? I'm not sure, and that's a difficult one. So my hope is that there will be some high-profile cases that will make sure everyone is fully focused on the personal liability issues, but it won't put off or encourage good disclosure, because that's what we need as well to ensure that we all move. And then in terms of your question on the different types, at the moment it's climate change is obviously the big one, but I think we're seeing more on biodiversity, rightly. The two are very interlinked, and I think there's becoming a lot more understanding of that. And then depending on the underlying company as well, then water, plastics, and also social responsibility as well. So that's more perhaps company dependent.
Thank you. I just want to say, so the case that Simon mentioned, the Shell case, it was filed in March this year, I think, and it was essentially Client Earth suing board of directors of Shell for mismanagement of physical and transition climate risk, and they are suing them under the two duties, directors' duties I mentioned, section 172 and 174 of Companies Act. So that's the case Simon mentioned, and it is reported as the first case in the world against directors personally. So
Yeah,
thank you very much.
it'll be really interesting just to see how it plays out. I don't know, and I think I suspect that the directors won't won't be liable, but it by bringing the case in itself raises the profile, and that, as much as anything, is important, showing that if there is perceived poor disclosure, then they'll be there on the sort of the front of the papers, and sort of reputational risk is as much as important as anything sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Reputational risk to their advisors as well, legal advisors, not only to the company, I would add. Thank you so much, Simon. My last question before we open it up to the audience is, bringing this back to you as a human being. As a dad, how do you feel when you look at your children knowing they're the ones to inherit the legacy of your work?
Again, another good question. I think with my kids, I mean, it's, yeah, there's a stage where you go through kind of stages of grief in a way, and one of them was that sense of you can easily lose a bit of hope. But then when I work with the likes of you and Chancery Lane Project, and you realise the future, and sowing the seeds of that for the future, then you realise you have to do something. And I just hope that when I look back and hopefully I've done my bit, or what I've been able to do, then you feel like you've tried your hardest, and hopefully I'll educate my children to do the same, and they'll sort of pick up the fight and do what they want to do. So it's very much driven from wanting a better world for them, from for what I do and why I do it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Simon. And that's all for my questions and for introducing Simon to all of you. So if anybody has a question, just raise your hand. We don't have a microphone because microphones are in the ceiling. So if you raise your hands, we will just ask you to stand up and ask your question.
Hi, Simon. A question about how everything's changed in the past, 5 years, but even since you first qualified. Speaking to a lot of young lawyers, what advice would you give to young lawyers starting out now? And would you do anything differently if you were starting out now?
Yes, that's a great question. I think I would, if I was speaking to myself as a newly qualified lawyer, I'd tell myself to be less frightened. I think at the time I thought, well, it's only when I'm a senior associate or a partner, that's when I'll have something positive to give, because that's when I'll know what I'm talking about. Whereas actually, what I mentioned earlier about someone wise said to me, it really is just words on a page. And once you realise that they are just words, and that when you do one contract, you can look at many contracts and interpret them, in the same way that you can read a bedtime story to your kid, then you can really add a huge amount of value. And then with like pro bono, whether it's with this forum or with Chancery Lane Project, there are lots of different ways to get involved as a lawyer, and whether it's through your firm or through other pro bono activities. So yeah, I think looking back, I wish I'd started earlier and not been didn't wait for quite so long to really kind of feel like I had worth and a voice.
Thank you. Great. I also wanted to say, online audience as well, if you want to pose questions, just feel free to use the raise hand function. I hope it's that. And we will just give you an opportunity to ask the question. And also any questions.
I think we saw some in the chat maybe.
Yeah, so
okay.
Fabienne, do you want to read out your question, or would you like us to read out your question?
Sure, either way. I was wondering, Simon, what are the best ways you've found to have such conversations with your corporate colleagues? The corporate world is a highly coded one. So what have you found works, doesn't work to increase the awareness and influence them? Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as I said, the area is complex, and it's very easy where, say, a banker wants to do the best for their company and help investment, to put out statements that are ambitious, let's say. And then the company's investor relations, they send through language again that is full of ambition, but you worry that if you scratch through the layers of it, there is no substance. And so in terms of the conversation, there's a lot of education. So these kind of talks where you're explaining what greenwashing risk is, and then putting up little pictures of like HSBC's example, that's a great one to show the bankers. Banks get in trouble for doing it. And so and the longer we go down the timeline, the more examples we have. And so then they really start getting it, that there's risk there, and it's not just a hollow risk. There's the front page of the paper, and I think that's the big fear. Is you don't want to be involved in a deal where your deal is there on the front page of the FT as being a lie, greenwashing claims, given how the likes of Client Earth are trying to pursue these people. So education is a good one. Putting in internal frameworks as well, so a little bit of admin and hoop jumping that they have to go through on every deal. But I think the main one is just sitting down with them and having a conversation, and I think they'll get it. They do.
Any more questions online or in the audience? Go ahead.
Hi Simon, thank you for your talk. I'm not a lawyer, and this is probably so it's not going to be a direct law question. However, if it is, you can tailor it to that. I was wondering if you have any personal success stories, looking back at the talk that we started with, from your own environmental experience, something you've worked on that you felt was successful in projecting a positive message about environmental, or maybe a law case that you worked on that went forward and was successful in putting forward a positive climate goal.
Thank you. Well, I think for me, it's been on the pro bono side, which I've been really, really happy to work on. And so some of the projects, I always started off with, well, I'm not an environmental lawyer, so what can I possibly offer here? And then one of them was working for the Environmental Investigation Agency, who were monitoring wildlife trafficking across Africa. And so helping to review public resources of cases, of convictions, lengths of sentencing, and that kind of thing. And so it was really advanced Google searching, I would describe it as. And you guys are probably a lot better in it than me, but and so sitting down and really trying to do this research across, there was about a dozen African countries. And then we would put all this information into a database and provide it to the Environmental Investigation Agency, who would then take it to local to governments in the area to show that either people that were being arrested were being let off easily because there wasn't enough evidence, or that the sentencing was no consistency in that. And so providing that information to them hopefully gives them the ammunition to work with governments. And so I was playing just a very small part in the background, but you could see how that kind of goes up the chain and eventually sits on the desk of governments in Tanzania, for example. So that for me is a really great, worthwhile thing, and didn't require any legal knowledge at all. As I said, it was just advanced Googling was the priority, so that was great.
Thank you. Sarah? Oh my God, so many questions. Okay, Sarah first, and then lady in front of you and the gentleman behind you. We can go.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Just a quick one on the current state of where we are with setting net zero goals. While they are not mandatory, have you perceived from your colleagues, or do you have the impression that fear of liability risk for greenwashing could be an obstacle rather than a driver of positive change, and could prevent companies from setting net zero targets at this moment in time?
Yes. So I think over the last say 3 or 4 years ago, it was very, there was a lot of opportunity and a lot of desire to set net zero goals because everyone was doing it. And if you didn't set a goal, then you were an outlier. I think now there's obviously with greenwashing claims and people really, looking at the goals and saying, is there, what are the metrics, for example, if you've got a 2030 goal or in 2023, so what have you been doing the last 3 years? Where are you along the line to achieving net zero by then? So I think people are going to become more wary of making either overly ambitious goals, which, I think there's a risk, isn't there? Because, you want ambition, you want people to really strive for net zero. That's the ultimate thing, but you want it to be done in a meaningful way that's quantifiable and achievable. So I think there'll be, I haven't got a crystal ball. I think there'll just be more care done in making those goals, which, you would hope that doesn't sort of derail or slow down the process at all. I think it'll maybe just make it a bit more mindful. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Hi, Simon. My question's actually quite similar. It was kind of like a fear-based question. So you mentioned people being afraid of being on the cover of the FT or being afraid of getting liability as a director. So I guess from your insight, do you think there's a way that lawyers in particular can help offset that fear by providing guidance about how to stay on the right side of the law, or give training to directors about the way they should approach their role going forward, and what role do you have in maybe removing that fear for corporates?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great, we've had law firms come in and speak to Bank of America about this kind of thing, and I know it's, a lot of law firms offer these kind of services to their clients. I think it's absolutely on point. I think they want to know, well, what their liability risks are, clearly, but also how they can go about their job, and especially those that are ambitious and want to, say, put in good goals and targets, how they can do so in a way that is not going to get them into hot bother, not going to put them on the front of the FT, and doing it in a responsible way. So I think that's where lawyers, junior, senior, it doesn't really matter, have a really important role to give their experience, but also just good drafting, for example, as well, in the contracts that those corporates use, and going into them and explaining what greenwashing means, and their kind of environmental responsibility. So yeah, totally. I think there's a huge part for law firms to play. I read an article, or I think it was actually a TED talk on was it Scope Z? So we've got Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, but Scope Z is the sort of like the lawyers, the marketing people, the people that have technically zero emissions, but have such a huge part in the process of climate change, because it's the lawyers, it's the planning officers, it's the architects, it's all those people that are behind the scenes helping these companies. So if Shell wants to build a new oil rig, they have to get planning permission for that, or get government's approvals, but it's all the likes of us, it's the lawyers in the background that either help or hinder that. And so I think there's a huge part for people like lawyers to play in the change, which will hopefully come.
Those are all, I heard them call advised emissions. So the emissions that lawyers advise on, facilitate. In advertising, I think advertising industry actually calculated them. I was on a panel in Gale, right, Matilda, with a gentleman from an advertising agency telling us how they are calculating the emissions they facilitate through advertising. So we are next in line. We'll soon probably know how to calculate our advised emissions and make our employment choices on that basis, hopefully. Gentleman in the back.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for your presentation. So I had a question specifically about your role in the equity capital markets team. And I was wondering whether you're starting to see an increased interest from the underwriters and to scrutinize and even verify ESG or sustainability related claims in IPO documentation and disclosures.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's my kind of bread and butter job during the week. And so, whenever a company is raising capital through an initial public offering or a rights issue or whatever it is, and there's a disclosure document, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a need for each company to have a section in there really on their ESG credentials, on their climate transition. And so those disclosures need to be tested, verified by the underwriters and their counsel and the experts behind them. And you know, with the cases that we're seeing, you know, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more coming out, you know, where those, you know, where they fail the test, it's just going to be on the front pages. And so there's the risk that investors will sue the corporates, the underwriters, but you know, almost worse in some ways is the risk of being on the front page. You know, the HSBC example, or you know, we've, as banks, you know, we want to be showing our own green credentials. You don't want to be on the same page as then doing the wrong thing as well on disclosure. So yeah, it's a huge part of it, because you know, nearly every single disclosure document these days will have some climate risk disclosure in there, whether it's on the risks or just on the opportunities.
Thank you. So I know we have no questions online. There's some questions in the audience. So we are, oh my God, okay guys. We'll take 4 more of them, but then you have to stay for the creative thinking discussion, right? Because we are here until 9 and we have questions from the audience, and we like to be flexible at Legal Voices. So we don't stick strictly to time, because we have all deadlines on work, which are strict. So let's be a bit different. So we'll go ahead, and the other people, if you want to raise hands so that I can. Okay, so after Will, then we can go there. And I think there was a question there from a lady as well. So we are going that direction now. We'll go first.
This is really a question for both of you. When your clients come to you, with your consultancy and some with your bank, and they are exposing themselves to greenwashing risks in some way, what is it usually that they have most trouble with? What are you advising on them most? Of all the areas that you showed on your slide, what is it that usually you find is the thing that they have most trouble with?
Simon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I suppose the thing they probably have most trouble with is thinking, well, you know, what is the risk? Is understanding the risk itself. You know, and you know, until recently, and when I'm talking last 2 or 3 years, you know, there haven't been many cases, and I think, well, you know, and I'm not saying this is, you know, what we've seen exactly, but you know, if a corporate said, well, you know, we just say, you know, we'll be net zero by 2030. You know, what does it matter? You know, if we don't get there, we'd like to be, but we're not putting enough in place. Then you know, and they might not fully understand what the risks are. And so I think usually it's showing them the front pages of papers, and you know, that really focuses their minds. But you know, I think most of the clients that we have they're becoming very savvy very quickly as to the risks, and get it quickly, and they have good advisors behind them. You know, their own legal counsels seem to, you know, yeah, we'll give them good advice.
So for me, it would be overstating ambitions, the one that borders my mind on that slide, as you know, and then deflecting. So overstating ambition, the typical very proud of having set the goal, but haven't really set any interim goals, they don't know how to achieve it, but they want to put it out there. And that's a very difficult conversation, right? Because you want to acknowledge the effort, but then you have to say it's not enough. And then you ask all these questions about, is the technology you are relying on actually addressing the problem? Are you mitigating your emissions 7% year on year? Because that's actually a mathematical calculation, how to get to net zero by 2050. So you're asking all these questions, and usually through that interaction, if there are too many no's, you're like, see, you said it, not me. So that's one. And then the deflecting is usually reliance on the technology, especially with the hard to abate sectors. Unfortunately, that's the only way right now. But like letter of law tells you it's greenwashing. So that's another conversation. No doomsaying, no denying, delaying. That's, you know, impossible these days. Just show the IPCC report. But overstating ambition and deflecting through innovation are the two that I encounter the most. And one at the front.
I've just actually finished drafting a green claims guidance document, and so sometimes I was curious as I was looking at the CMA examples and so on, as to how far I should go in my advice. So do I advise for strict compliance? Do I say go far beyond that, knowing that it could be more costly to do so? And obviously, because I drafted it, I opted for the latter. But to what extent do you see a scope for lawyers to give advice beyond strict compliance, especially in the ESG space, where obviously we do also have to provide advice that can be cost efficient and can be easily implementable? So yeah, what's your take on the scope for lawyers to go beyond state compliance?
Thank you.
I mean, personally, I'd say go for it, because obviously I'm a great lover for the environment, and I'd like to see the greatest ambition possible for that. But I think it's you can advise in a way that shows obviously what the law is and what the technical requirements are. But I think a lot of companies will see the opportunities in going beyond that. And the marketing potential of, if they are required to do A, but they do B, C, and D, and their competitors are only doing A, then they're ahead of the game. And legislation, regulation, that's going to catch up anyway. So doing it early, and that's the kind of advice I think that they need, is that being a trendsetter is a good thing in this space, and being green and being seen to be green is really positive. So I personally don't see, obviously you can't overstate what the actual law is because it's the law, but you can certainly show what ambition can look like, and that can be really helpful and to a business and their marketing departments as well.
Very true. Thank you. You ready for one more question? Is that okay, Simon?
Yeah, of course.
Good. Over to you.
Thank you. My name is Quinton. I work with a risk intelligence consultancy nearby. So I'm going to ask less of a law question, something a little more broad. The last year, we've seen a lot of geopolitical turbulence as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an energy crisis in Europe. In your experience, your profession, has this somewhat, potentially dampened the appetite for investment in green projects, green energy, perhaps, or climate action? And if so, or if not, do you think there's a risk of additional greenwashing as a result, maybe to mask a lack of investment or a reduced desire to invest in green projects?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think there is a risk that when any event so big as something like the Russia invasion happens, or whether it was COVID, or that kind of takes the spotlight off other events. And so there's certainly been a risk, and with, as you say, things like the rising of people struggling with prices, you start sort of as a group, people can become more selfish and thinking about these things. So I think there is a risk, and then there's also a risk that the corporates will try and look to market themselves out of it in a way that could potentially be seen as greenwashing. But I don't know. And then you get the sort of the Shell case in the news again, and it brings the spotlight back to it. I mean, my sort of big issue is just making sure that politicians are honest, and it seems like a rare thing, but really on top of it and held to account and made to really think about these things. And whilst I don't advocate some of the protesting that happens, the likes of them that seem to do a really good job of keeping it in the public imagination and right at the forefront. So it's a very waffly answer because it's a really good question, but I think you're right in many ways. I think there has been an element of focus shifting, but I'm hopeful that it'll be shifted back fairly quickly.
Thank you. And I'll stop it here because we are getting quite close to our comfort break before we do creative content discussion. Simon, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're also staying a second.
Yes, I am.
See, follow the example, guys. So the clocks.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I just want to keep up one slide because you might use it during the break. And that is a slide about how you can get involved with us. So you can become our member. And I want the slide up. Let me just move this. Yes, because there are QR codes. We learned how to do them for our launch, and then we fell in love with QR codes. So now we do everything with QR codes. So you can become our member by scanning that one. You can follow us on LinkedIn, where we do a lot of great work. And now we have a team of 8 LinkedIn ladies who are helping manage our content. So it's just getting better. You can hold your own knowledge session like this one. And just to say, we just need you to submit a proposal through that QR code, and we will help you organize it. So it's not going to be on your shoulders. As I said, there are 30 people behind each session, and we will provide those 30 people. So it's not all up to you. It will be with us. And we will do all for you, all the links in, right? Everything will be done. We just need ideas so that people drive these sessions, because the first 6 ones are held by us, the founding members, but then it's you. And if nobody wants to hold the sessions, then there's no point for us to exist. So I would encourage you to submit your knowledge proposals as well. And then you can also already register for our May knowledge session, which will be led by Matilda, and it will be on contracts for climate. And we already have the event up. It will be in person at Bateswells, but it will also be online, very much like this one. So we'll keep this slide up, because I think it's a good opportunity for anybody who wants to scan these to come forward and do so, and also online. And we will take 5 minutes. So if we could be back at past, we will reunite in this room also with the online audience. We'll play the creative content. So if you haven't watched it, don't worry, we will watch it together, and then we will break out into the rooms and discuss it in those smaller groups. Thank you so much.